You've done everything right. And still, something inside feels wrong. The hunger you feel is not for love, not even for pleasure. It is for escape. Escape from the silence within. Each time you feed it, the emptiness grows darker. Each time you run, the shadow grows stronger. And yet, collapse is not only an ending. It is the threshold of rebirth. This video will take you into the mask of desire, into the ruin it leaves behind, and into the hidden shadow that waits to be faced. The mask of desire. You've done everything right, and still, something inside feels wrong. You wake in the morning and move through the motions of life, but there's a silence underneath, a hunger that doesn't speak in words. At first, you tell yourself it's love. You call it chemistry, passion, desire. The world agrees with you. Everyone praises the fire in your eyes, the thrill in your step, the way you chase intensity as though it were oxygen itself. But quietly, beneath the surface, a mask is being fastened to your soul. Sexual addiction doesn't wear the scent of whiskey. It leaves no powder on glass tables, no receipts from a casino floor. Instead, it dresses itself in intimacy. It hides behind tenderness. It mimics romance. It plays the role of devotion. And because of this disguise, it is one of the most destructive shadows of all. Because no one sees it for what it is. Not even you. You begin to mistake hunger for love. You begin to mistake longing for connection. What Jung warned us becomes true in your life. What you refuse to face quietly begins to rule you. At first, it feels alive. The rush of pursuit, the spark of attention, the flood of chemicals lighting up your veins. You feel chosen, wanted, powerful. For a fleeting moment, you feel whole. But the high fades quickly. And with each encounter, the emptiness deepens. Darker, heavier, hungrier than before. What you are chasing is not love, not even pleasure. You are chasing escape. Escape from silence. Escape from your own shadow. Jung would call this possession. The shadow takes the wheel of your being, and every time you give in, it grows stronger. What began as a flicker of desire becomes a fire that consumes everything in its path. And yet, it is a quiet destruction, not the dramatic collapse of overdose or bankruptcy. This one leaves you smiling at parties, holding hands in public, laughing in photographs, while inside, the mask tightens. The truth is unbearable to name. That what you thought was intimacy was only performance. That what you believed was love was only a mask carved by your own wound. Still, the mask doesn't crack easily, because the world applauds it. Society calls it freedom. Friends call it success. And you call it passion. But in the private hours, when no one is watching, the silence returns. The same emptiness you've been running from all along, waiting patiently for you to turn and face it. Where on this inner path do you find yourself now? The quiet ruin. Addiction rarely announces itself with thunder. It doesn't always end in flames, bottles scattered, or public collapse. Some addictions erode more softly, like water wearing away stone, like rot spreading silently through the beams of a house. Sexual addiction is exactly this kind of ruin. A ruin that smiles in photographs, that keeps up appearances, that hides beneath the mask of normalcy, while inside, the soul is crumbling piece by piece. The cycle is relentless. Craving rises. You give in. Shame follows. The emptiness deepens. And so the craving returns, louder than before. You whisper to yourself, "This is the last time." But you already know. The shadow doesn't care about promises. Control becomes the cruelest illusion. You tell yourself you're the one choosing, that you can stop whenever you decide. But the truth is harder to swallow. It is not you who chooses. It is the shadow that chooses for you. Jung called it possession, and in these moments you feel it. The quiet voice that tells you, just one more time. The voice that knows your weak spots better than you do. You aren't the master anymore. You are the marionette, and the strings are pulled by something hidden, unseen, but merciless. And the destruction? It doesn't look like chaos. It looks like relationships slowly drained of trust. It looks like intimacy hollowed out until touch feels mechanical, empty, lifeless. It looks like self-respect bleeding quietly until you no longer believe in the strength of your own word. On the outside, the house still stands. The walls are painted, the windows polished. But inside, the foundation is crumbling. This is the ruin that no one speaks about. The ruin that doesn't make headlines. The ruin that leaves you functioning, working, smiling, but also slowly dying. And the cruelest part? No one else may notice until it's too late. Because quiet destruction doesn't leave scars the world can see. It leaves scars on the soul. So you keep moving, pretending, wearing the mask. Yet deep down you sense it. Something fragile is breaking, and silence itself is starting to ache. What part of your shadow is quietly asking to be seen? The hunger of the shadow. The hunger feels physical. It pulses in your body, rises in your veins, whispers in the night like an uninvited guest. But beneath the surface, the hunger is not for flesh. It is for something far more elusive. You are not starving for sex. You are starving for recognition, for validation, for escape, for the comfort of being seen, even if only for a moment. Desire becomes the disguise. Sex becomes the ritual, but the wound underneath, it remains untouched, festering in silence. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And this is what the shadow does. It convinces you that what you chase is passion, when in truth, what you are chasing is absence. You are chasing the missing part of yourself. The archetypes appear, wearing their masks. The devourer, always hungry, never full. The false lover, charming yet hollow. The hollow king, adored by many, but empty inside his throne room. These are not myths from old stories. They are living within you, playing out each time you give in to the craving. And society? It makes the hunger stronger. Desire is packaged and sold to you at every turn, on screens, in songs, in the gaze of strangers across crowded rooms. The world tells you this is freedom. That indulgence is happiness. That lust is love. But deep down, you feel the paradox. The more you feed it, the hungrier it becomes. The more you indulge, the emptier you feel. Like drinking from a saltwater sea, your thirst only deepens. And so the shadow grows. It thrives on this cycle, this hunger that is never satisfied. And you begin to forget what true nourishment even feels like. There is a moment, though, when the illusion flickers, when the touch fades too quickly, when the laughter echoes hollow, when the bed feels cold even as a body lies beside you. And in that moment, a deeper truth begins to whisper. This was never about sex. It was always about the wound. Which truth in this story touched your soul the most? The cost of emptiness. Every shadow extracts a price, and this one takes more than you imagine. First, it steals intimacy. At the beginning, you convince yourself you are chasing closeness. You tell yourself that every encounter means something. But true intimacy is not born in heat. It is born in presence, in patience, in vulnerability. Addiction kills all three. Instead of connection, you become addicted to novelty. Instead of depth, you crave stimulation. You share bodies, but not souls. You lie in the same bed, but feel oceans apart. And slowly, you forget how to bond at all. What you longed for, closeness, becomes the very thing you can no longer hold. Then, it steals your identity. Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And so you hide. With one person you are tender. With another, you are dominant. With another still, you are playful, mysterious, charming. Masks upon masks. But when the masks are removed, who are you? Each performance cuts away a fragment of yourself. Until one day, you stare into the mirror and do not recognize the eyes staring back. And finally, it steals your self-respect. Each time you promise yourself, never again. Each time you fail, the voice of shame grows louder. You are weak. You are broken. You are beyond repair. Shame becomes both the prison and the fuel of the addiction. The deeper the shame, the more you run. The more you run, the deeper the shame. This is the quiet collapse no one sees. On the outside, you can still laugh, still work, still carry conversations. But within, the temple is crumbling. Stone by stone, dignity falls away. Intimacy, identity, self-respect, three pillars of the soul, and all three are slowly dismantled. What remains when they are gone? Only emptiness, only silence, only shadow. And yet, somewhere in that silence, a faint cry still echoes. The self that refuses to die, the self waiting to be remembered. Let your voice be heard. Someone else might need to read it. The collapse and the breaking point. Every illusion has an expiration date. For a time, you convince yourself you are in control. You whisper, "I can stop whenever I choose." But control is only a mask, and masks always crack. The collapse rarely comes with warning. Sometimes it arrives as betrayal when the double life is exposed. Sometimes it arrives as loss when the one you loved most finally leaves. And sometimes it comes in silence, a loneliness so heavy it feels like death itself, even as your body keeps breathing. This is the moment the facade falls apart, and it terrifies you, because without the mask, without the addiction, without the endless chase, what remains? The shadow, the wound, the silence you have fled for years. Jung wrote that transformation only comes after breakdown. The old self must die before the new one can be born. And collapse, though it feels like an ending, is often the necessary beginning. Think of winter. Trees stripped bare, the earth frozen, the sky gray and hollow. It looks like death, but it is also preparation for spring. The seed must break before it can sprout. The cocoon must tear before wings can open. So too must your illusion collapse before you can awaken. And yet, not everyone survives this threshold. Some spiral deeper, clinging to the addiction even as it drags them toward ruin. Others awaken, finally willing to face what they've been running from all along, themselves. This is the breaking point, the threshold where everything you've built, every story you've told yourself, comes undone. And in that undoing, you are offered a choice. Confront the shadow, or be consumed by it. It is both death and birth, the death of illusion, the birth of awareness, the moment when you can no longer hide from the truth that has been waiting patiently in the dark. This was never love. This was your wound calling your name. Where on this inner path do you find yourself now? The war and the integration. The breaking point is not the end. It is the beginning of war. Not a war against sex or desire or even the body, but a war against illusion, against the shadow that whispers in your ear, just once more. You cannot change. This is who you are. In this war, your weapon is not violence but endurance. You sit in silence without feeding the hunger. You endure the cravings without escaping into another body. You confront the emptiness you once buried beneath endless pursuit. It feels like agony, and yet it is transformation. Because only when you endure the hunger without running from it, do you begin to discover what you were truly hungry for all along. Love, meaning, peace, wholeness. Jung did not believe in destroying the shadow. He believed in integrating it. Because the shadow carries power. Primal, raw, terrifying power. If you try to kill it, it returns stronger. But if you face it, name it, and allow it to be part of you, its power becomes yours. Desire is not a curse. It is energy. The same fire that burned you can be transmuted into creativity, intimacy, devotion, depth. This is not suppression, for suppression only breeds obsession. This is transmutation, turning shadow into strength, hunger into healing. But what if you don't face it? What if you keep running? Then the shadow consumes you slowly, until nothing remains. The hunter grows bitter, still chasing conquests that no longer want him. The manipulator ends in isolation, feared but unloved. The lover fades into secrecy, forgotten, never truly known. This is the fate of those who never confront the wound. Not dramatic destruction, but quiet fading. A soul slowly dissolving into emptiness. And yet, the choice remains. Face the shadow, or be devoured by it. To face it is terrifying. It means admitting your passion wasn't love. Your desire wasn't destiny. You were not in control. You were controlled. But the reward is liberation. Because once you see the shadow, it cannot enslave you anymore. It becomes part of you, not master over you. And in that moment, intimacy becomes possible again. Self-respect returns. Identity heals. Love, the kind that once felt impossible, suddenly becomes real. Jung left us a final warning. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And yet, if you dare to stop running, if you dare to face the silence, if you dare to see your shadow, then what once destroyed you becomes the very fire that rebuilds you. So I leave you with this. Are you feeding your shadow, or are you facing it? Which truth in this story touched your soul the most?